Good morning. Good morning. Please rise, either in body or in spirit, and join with me in our call to worship, which is printed in your bulletin. God said, 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord. Jesus said, come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. We come in the name of the Spirit, resting from our labors. Let our worship now begin. Please remain standing as together we sing our opening hymn, Fairest Lord Jesus, which is on page 87 in your hymnal. Our Old Testament reading today comes from Psalm 45. 1 and 2, and then verses 6 through 9. This reading can be found on page 489 of your Pew Bible. Listen now to the reading of the Holy Scriptures. My heart overflows with a goodly thing. I address my verses to the King. My tongue is like the pen of a ready scribe. You are the fairest of the sons of men. Grace is poured upon your lips. Therefore God has blessed you forever. Your divine throne endures forever and ever. Your royal scepter is a scepter of equity. You love righteousness and hate wickedness. Therefore God, your God, has anointed you with the oil of gladness above your fellows. Your robes are all fragrant with myrrh and aloes and cassia. From ivory palaces stringed instruments make you glad. Daughters of kings are among your ladies of honor. At your right hand stands the queen in gold of Ophir. Our New Testament reading this morning is from the first chapter of James, verses 19 through 27, found on page 1054 of your Pew Bible. Know this, my beloved brethren, let every man be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. For the anger of man does not work the righteousness of God. Therefore, put away all filthiness and rank, growth of wickedness, and receive with meekness the implanted word, which is able to save your souls. But be doers of the word, and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man who observes his natural face in a mirror. For he observes himself and goes away, and at once forgets what he was like. But he who looks what he was like, but he looks into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and perseveres, being no hearer that forgets, but a doer that acts, he shall be blessed in his doing. If anyone thinks that he is religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his heart, this man's religion is vain. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God and the Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their affliction, and to keep oneself unstained from the world. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. We will now sing the first verse of Jesus Loves Me as our youth come forward.
It's still a little bit farther away, but you still were able to walk. It's a beautiful day like it is today outside. And you play all afternoon, and it's time for you to go home. And right as you open the door, it starts pouring down rain. And your friend says, "Thanks for coming, be safe going home." How would you feel about that? Oh, yeah. Okay, I got another one. So you guys all go to school, right? And I don't know if you take your lunch or not, but let's assume you take your lunch to school, okay? And you open up your backpack and you discover that no one placed your lunch in the backpack this morning, so you have nothing to eat. And you tell your friend on the way to the cafeteria that you're hungry, and when you sit down with them and you open your backpack and you say, "I don't have any lunch," and they're getting out their lunch, and they say, I bet you can't wait to get home tonight so you can get something to eat. How would that make you feel? Not very good, right? Yeah, so let's think about those. So the first one, what's something that the first guy could have done, the first person maybe could have done, instead of wishing you well on your way home on the rain? Right, you could wait here till it's done. Or anything else, maybe like, here's an umbrella, at the least, right? Or maybe mom could drive you home, or something, right? There's something you could actually do to make that better. What about the second one? What about the lunch? What would you probably do, Maddie? Because I could see you doing this.
I could offer them some of my
Offer them some of your lunch, that's right. Or maybe if there is a lunch line, if you have some extra money, offer to buy them a lunch or something. But there's something that you could do. And I think that's the point of the scriptures today. There's things that we can do to let people know that we're Christians just by our actions and being a doer instead of a hearer. Because even if your friend in the rain would have said, I'll pray for you on the way home, that still doesn't help you get home safe and dry, right? So we can always pray. I'm not saying we don't need to pray, but sometimes just simply praying for someone is not enough. We need to think of ways, with God's help, that we can be a doer and do something for someone instead of just hearing. Okay, let's say a prayer. Dear God, help us to see those around us.
help us to see those around us
Who are in need,
who are in need,
and help us
be
doers
doers
instead of hearers.
instead of hearers.
Amen.
Thank you, Joan. I was going to mention earlier, and I forgot that most of you probably aren't aware that Joan was very sick this week with the flu. She still got the newsletter all done, and we got our newsletter this morning. She got to do the children's one, and I thought, well, I might have to do that. If you're still sick, but she's doing much better now, so thanks for all of that and all that you continue to do for us and for our church, Joan, even when she's sick. So. All right. What is your thing, or actually just what's your thing? Meaning, what is your thing? What is it that sort of defines who you are? What is your essence? What is it about you that can help describe the person that you are, or the person that you want to be? What's your thing? What is it that makes you who you are? And what would you identify as your thing or things? Most of us have a lot more than just one thing that describes our essence, that really would indicate to people a lot about us. Most of you know that one of my things is preaching. And I can really get carried away with that, as you know, except on short service Sunday. I'm trying to limit it, see if I can limit myself there. Also, some of you know that one of my things is fishing, which I don't need to talk about, but the reason we have a fish fry is to give me another excuse to fish all spring and summer long. One thing, however, that you may not know about me, one of my lesser known things, is actually sunscreen. I don't know why. I don't know how it happened. I don't know how it evolved in my life, but I am a devotee of sunscreen. And if you talk to my wife, she can tell you that she's been with me many times. When I put on the sunscreen and I lather it on my arms and my legs, and of course the back of the neck, you got to get the ears, you got to get the nose, you got any exposed part. I even put it on my toes, so you don't want to have a sunburn there. It's very important if you go outside to make sure that you have sunscreen on. And it is so important to me that in my boat, I don't have one, but I have 2 bottles of sunscreen. In my truck, I have 2 bottles of sunscreen. This is actually one that I took out of my truck this morning. Just I thought, oh, I'll use this as a visual. Of course, I have it right there in my truck, so I take one out. I even have a bottle of sunscreen in the top drawer of my nightstand beside my bed. Who knows? When you have to get up and go outside, you've got to be prepared with the sunscreen. So sunscreen is one of my things as well. So in thinking about things, I want to give you a few other examples so you can get get the idea of this essence of things that I'm talking about this morning. And so, of course, I want to use as an example, because she's here, and I don't have to pick on all the rest of you all the time, my lovely wife, Julia. And I was talking to her about this, what's my thing, as I was thinking about this introduction to the message this week a few days ago, and I said, well, Julia, I would say your thing is music. And she thought about that a little bit, and she said, well, really, my thing is family. And I would have to agree. That family is certainly her thing, but music also is her thing. It's been a part of who she is since, I don't know, she was a very little girl, I'm sure. Some of you may or may not know, her mother was a church organist as well. So she grew up with somebody playing the organ, playing the piano around the house and whatever since she was a very little girl. That's not an experience that I had as a young person. So really, my appreciation for and love of music is greatly due to my wife Julia, because she brought that into my life. So music is certainly one of her things, one of the things that we are going to get to experience part of Julia's thing as she becomes our choir director and participates in our services here from this point on. So that's a thing as far as Julia's concerned. I've sort of gotten reinterested in baseball in the last month or so. I don't know, some of you are baseball fans may have, but I've been thinking a lot about baseball and been realizing that, I followed the Cardinals for years and years and years, and I was thinking about this what's your thing, and it reminded me of Whitey Herzog. Those of you that are really Cardinal fans, you know who Whitey Herzog is. In the 80s, he was the manager of the Cardinals, and one of his things was speed. He wanted baseball players that were fast, that could run, that could play defense, that could go get that ball and catch that ball, and that could get on base with a bunt or with an infield hit, that could steal a base, that would go from first to third all the time. Whenever there was a hit to the outfield, his thing was speed. That was one of his things as a manager. And if you follow the Cardinals in the last month or so and watch what Mike Schilda's been doing with the Cardinals, he's sort of taken on that idea as well. And guess what? The Cardinals are winning again. No, they lost last night, but you can't win again. So Whitey Herzog, his thing was speed. Let me give you one other person that I'll come back to here in just a little bit, and that is Martin Luther. Not Martin Luther King Jr. He had a lot of things as well, but his namesake, Martin Luther, 500 years ago, the great Protestant reformer. His thing, one of his things was salvation by faith alone. Salvation by faith alone. And Martin Luther didn't really like the book of James in the New Testament, because James really emphasizes for us how to be doers of the word and not just hearers only. So what we're going to be listening to, what you're going to be hearing from me through the month of September, not next Sunday because I won't be here next Sunday, but all the other Sundays in September as well as this one, is we're going to be looking at the book of James. And we're going to be seeing and examining some of the things that James says about being doers of the word, and how maybe that impacts us as Christians today here in the 21st century. And the first thing we're going to be looking at is this idea of what is your thing. Because James, in the very first beginning here, the first chapter of the book of James, he talks about what he really believes should be Christians' thing. Well, what should be our thing as Christians? So that's what we're going to be thinking about this morning, and I'm going to be talking about a little bit. I would encourage you for this month of September to be reading the book of James. It's a very short book. It won't take you long at all to read it. Read through it, because that's what we're going to be considering and thinking about. And we're going to begin that today with, what's your thing as a Christian? Shall we pray? Gracious God, may the words of my lips and the meditations of our hearts and minds be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. James begins this passage that we heard this morning, James 1, verse 19. He says, know this. Know this. And he's wanting us to pay attention to what he's going to say right here. He's gone all the way to the 19th verse, and then he says, know this. You need to know this. We need to remember that James is talking to Christians. You know, our gospel stories from the four gospels, that speaks to anyone. And particularly to those who don't know the gospel message, it's giving us the gospel message. Well, a lot of the epistles that were written after the time of the gospels were really Christian leaders who were writing to Christians. And that certainly was James' intent in this particular book. He's writing to those people who consider themselves to be Christians, to be followers, to be devotees, if you will, of Jesus Christ. And he says, know this. And he's telling us then how to have a godly life, what we need to do the Christian thing. And what is it that he says right there in that first verse? He says, know this, my beloved brethren. Let every man be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger. And then he goes on and elaborates on that. You know, it's so easy to do just the opposite of what James says right here. You know, it's easy to be quick to speak. Quick to speak and quick to anger. But James says as Christians we need to slow down. We need to slow down and we need to listen to what others have to say. And more importantly, and probably more relevant to the context in which James is speaking there, we need to listen to the word of truth. We need to listen to what God has to say to us. You know, it was true in James' time 20 centuries ago, but here in the 21st century, it's certainly true that we're often moving so fast, we're so busy, that we really don't stop and listen to hear the Word of God. Even now, I guarantee you there's some of you that are sitting out there thinking about, okay, let's see, what am I going to do for lunch today? What's going to happen? You know, where am I going to go? What are we going to have? Okay, if we go here, I think I'll order this or do this. Wait, look at this. It's 11:24. We were out by this time, like last time. We're still sitting here, and you just getting started with this message. Oh my God. You know, we're moving ahead. We're moving so quickly in this world today. And every one of you that laughed, I know you're thinking that. So, you know, that's it. James says we simply need to slow down. He said we need not be able to be quick to hear, or that we won't be able to be quick to hear and slow to speak and slow to anger until we slow down our lives, until we actually focus our lives on God. He says that God's Word cannot have its proper work and effect in our lives if we will not slow down and listen to God. Now, 500 years ago, in the early 16th century, Martin Luther, that I mentioned a little bit earlier, what really got him fired up and got him involved in the midst of what became known as the Protestant Reformation was the selling of indulgences. A quick history lesson, if you don't remember indulgences. Indulgences were something that you could go to the church at that particular time, and you could give so much money to the church that you would receive an indulgence to absolve you of your sin. So if you'd done something wrong, you went to the church, you bought an indulgence or purchased an indulgence, and that took care of the sin. And then indulgences became even broader than that. You could go to the church and you could buy indulgences to absolve the sins of your kids or of your parents. And then it got even more involved than that. The church, they said, wow, this has gone really well, so we're going to sell indulgences. Do you remember your old dead Aunt Sally that died a couple of years ago? She was sort of, she went to church some, but she went out and partied a lot and did this and that. Old Aunt Sally, she might be sitting in purgatory right now. Don't you want to purchase a big indulgence for her to guarantee that she goes on to heaven? You could purchase salvation for your deceased friends and relatives with an indulgence. the church. Now, this is an important fundraiser for the church. You know, church people are always looking for good ways to raise money. You know, to find a way to get more money. And indulgences worked extremely well. But Luther, he's not the only one, but he certainly was one that was deeply offended by these actions of the church. Because he was an ordained priest in the church at that time, and he was offended that the church was selling grace. That the church would dare to sell absolution of sins. That the church would dare, even if the money was right, would dare to sell the assurance of eternal salvation. If you just had enough money to buy that big gold indulgence for old Aunt Sally. All of these things Luther firmly believed, and he was well grounded in the Bible in his beliefs, that these were freely offered by God through the work of our Savior, Jesus Christ. And so Luther challenged the church, and he posted his 95 Theses on the church door. That became Luther's thing, that he was known for these 95 Theses. A year and a half ago, we posted 10 Theses on our door, and it took up the whole door, just 10 of them. He had 95 statements that he was saying. These are theses of things that the church should not be doing. That was Luther's thing. And they got posted there on the door. And you know, once you've got a thing, Luther and any of us, once we get a thing, well, you're going to talk about it. Just ask me about fishing. You know? Okay, if you've got a thing, you're going to talk about it. And sometimes, if somebody's talking about it in a way you don't like, your rhetoric gets pretty defensive in what you're saying. And sometimes we might even use some shameless hyperbole. You know, that fish was my gosh. Oh, yeah. Well, you know, but we're going to talk about that thing that's important to you, because we want to justify our thing as being an important thing. And listening would just give the opposition an opportunity to challenge the validity of my thoughts, of my beliefs, of my opinions. And certainly during his time, Luther saw either faith or works, one or the other, as the basis of Christian salvation. And the church was really saying, it's what you do and it's what you buy. You know, the work that you're doing here is going to get you to salvation. And Luther said, no. Salvation by faith alone. And so the book of James, which we heard just a little piece of this morning, was not a favorite of Martin Luther's. Because James says, be doers of the word. Be actors as Christians. You know, not just faith, but you've got to be a doer if you're going to be a Christian. So Martin Luther thought the book of James was dangerous. He said, and I quote, we should throw the epistle of James out of our church, for it doesn't amount to much. I would have said it doesn't amount to hell of beans, but he just said it didn't amount to much, end quote. Luther was not a fan of the book of James. Now, ironically, if you think about it, Lutheran churches around the globe, even right here in our own town, use the lectionary, the same lectionary that we use. And during this month of September, Lutherans all around the world are going to be reading the book of James. And they're going to be studying it also as their lectionary scripture. And plenty of those Lutherans are going to love what James has to say to us. Every verse of it, you know, because folks are no longer living and dying over indulgences or living and dying over faith versus work arguments. But Luther was. That was Luther's thing. That's where he was. And in the heat of this battle, in the midst of any campaign, actually, James' advice that he's giving us as Christians right here is particularly difficult to hear and certainly difficult to abide by. He says, be quick to listen. Be slow to speak and slow to anger. But only in those tumultuous days of the Reformation, there was no place for patient listening as far as Luther was concerned. It was a war of words, and Luther had lots of words. He had a lot more even than those 95 theses that he posted. He wrote volumes and volumes and volumes about issues within the church, And all of these words were enabled at that same time by the invention of the printing press. So Luther's 95 Theses were printed and spread all over Europe in the 16th century. In a war of words, one cannot afford to be slow to speak. At least that's what Luther believed. In the 500 years since, I think very little has changed for human beings. Look at the political process in this country today. Enabled by a little newer media than just the printing press. You know, we've got radio, television, the internet, of course. We're still in a war of words. To play the political game today is to be quick to speak. You got to get it out there on Twitter first before anybody else. You got to get your words out there. You got to be quick to speak. You got to be quick to anger if somebody says something that you don't like. And you only listen to those who finance your campaign, who buy your commercials, who support your cause. And that's both sides of the political spectrum. Both sides. We have, as a nation, come to accept the rancor and the half-truths as inevitable aspects of our political process. It's a necessary evil that we tolerate and we excuse. The fake news is everywhere. Words, they just fill our lives. They just fill every part of our lives, whether they are true or not. Words fill our lives today. They fill in all the silent places of our lives. They suffocate us. They drown any still, small voice that we should be listening to. At the end of today's reading of James 1 that Anne shared with us, James offers a simple description of what he calls pure Christian religion. Now, some of you may have to cover your ears because it's a 4-letter word. His simple description of pure Christian religion is to care. C-A-R-E. He said Christians should care. That's his description at the very end, short and sweet. He says being a follower of Jesus means that you have to care. And he specifically says you have to care for orphans and widows in their distress. And you have to keep yourself unstained by the words of the world. In James' patriarchal context, the orphans and the widows, well, they were the extremely vulnerable. They were the most vulnerable people in that 1st century, 2nd century society, because there was no social safety net at that time. There was no ADC, there was no SSI, there was no protection at all for orphans and for widows. And so James, echoing Jesus from Matthew's gospel, James is commending the church, commending Christians to care for the least of these, the most vulnerable members of the society, those who are the most in the need of care. So that's what James says we have to do, to be doers of the word. We have to care. Care for the most vulnerable in our society. So my question was, well, how do you do that? How do we care for the most vulnerable people in our society, for the least of these? As Christians, what are we supposed to do? I think it goes right along with what else James is saying here. I spent my last year of seminary finishing up classwork, but also I was serving at Barnes Jewish Hospital. In this final year of seminary, I had to complete a 400-hour unit of what's called clinical pastoral education, CPE for short. And basically, what I was doing it in Barnes Jewish Hospital, and I was there sort of serving an internship for hospital chaplaincy. Was basically the role, as I saw it there, in this unit of CPE that I had to complete. And I didn't have much hospital experience. I must admit, I hadn't been in hospitals very often in my lifetime before this happened. I didn't have that much pastoral experience, period. And so I thought, okay, I know what this is going to be. I'm going to be going in and I'm going to be talking with people and dealing with people that are dealing with very serious illness. Maybe even in some cases, terminal illness that they're dealing with. I'm going to be talking with them and talking with their family members, so I'm going to be needing to offer them godly encouragement. I'm going to be needing to read scriptures to them. I'm going to need to share the most uplifting things that I can come up with. Of course, reading good passages from the Bible. I'm going to have to memorize the 23rd Psalm, obviously, and I'm going to have to be saying prayers with them. And while all those were little pieces of the care that I found out I needed to provide in the Barnes Jewish in St. Louis, the most important, the most caring thing I found that I had to offer those people in their life-changing moments was to be quick to listen and to be slow to speak. I heeded James' advice that he gives all Christians right here. And I really believe that listening is essential to Christian life. Religious expression that is pure before God, that's James' phrase, it's much more about listening than it is about speaking. The message of Jesus is better heard in the listening ear of one who cares than in a million arguments, than in a million angry words, than in a million hyperbolic speeches, even than in a million sermons or messages on Sunday morning. Let everyone be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to speak. Archbishop Rowan Williams once said, and I quote, Silence somehow reaches to the root of our human problem. Words help to strengthen the illusions with which we surround, protect, and comfort ourselves. Without silence, we will never get any closer to knowing who we are before God. End quote. Quick to listen, slow to speak. That is how we care for others. That's how we invite others into our hearts. Quick to listen, slow to speak is also how we care for God. That's how we invite God into our hearts, into our lives. Quick to listen, slow to speak is the path to becoming the person that God is calling you to be. We all know that an angry word, spoken, uttered, can never be taken back. It can never be taken back. A stream of words is often lost in a world flooded with all the opinions of so many different perspectives. But, a silent mouth and a listening ear can be deafening. That's what cuts through all the noise. So, my friends, I give you the advice that James gives to us as Christians this day. Be quick to listen and slow to speak. Because listening is love. Listening is a way to love the hurting. It's a way to love the vulnerable. It's a way to love the least of these among us. And it's also a way to love God. I guess everybody's got their thing. I know you all got your things just as I expounded on mine this morning. But as Christians, maybe, just maybe listening to one another and listening to God can be our thing. Thanks be to God. Amen. Let us now respond to our word this morning by rising either in body or in spirit and singing our hymn of response, which is number 656 in your hymnal. Take time to be holy. Shall we rise together? and sing. May be seated. And please join with me now in our affirmation of faith, the Apostles' Creed, statement of faith that has been repeated for centuries by Christians who want to take that time to be holy. Please join me now in this affirmation. I believe in God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, and in Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord, who was conceived by the Holy Ghost, born of the Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, dead, and buried. He descended into hell. The third day he rose again from the dead. He ascended into heaven, and sitteth on the right hand of God the Father Almighty. From thence he shall come to judge the quick and the dead. I believe in the Holy Ghost, the Holy Catholic Church, the communion of saints, the forgiveness of sins, the resurrection of the body, and the life everlasting. Amen. We are now at that point in our service where we have an opportunity to give back in the many ways that we have been blessed in our lives. So as our ushers come forward and we hear our special music this morning, please be generous in your gifts. God, we bring these gifts before you now. We ask that they be used to help further your kingdom throughout this world, that they be used to help offer care to all those who are in need. And with these gifts, we also give you our talents, our time, our abilities to offer the care as well to all that we come into contact with. All these things we ask in your holy name. Amen. You may be seated. Let us now pause for just a moment of silence as we listen for God and as we prepare ourselves for prayer. Shall we pray? Good and gracious God, you told us from the very beginning that we would earn our bread by the sweat of our brow. We are interdependent in our laboring, Lord. We depend on the migrant worker who pick our lettuce and our strawberries. We depend on the nurses' aides who empty the bedpans. We depend on the teachers who help form our children's minds. So we thank you, Lord, for the gifts and talents you have given us that allow us to earn a living and contribute something positive to our world. And we pray, dear Lord, for those who are without work. We ask that you sustain them just as you sustain us in your love. Help us to realize that we have worth as human beings, job or no job. But that's so hard to get, Lord. Our society preaches to us that our worth comes from success or being better than the Joneses. But we need to know that our worth comes because you made us. We are your children, no matter what, job or no job. You love us, and you call us to love and support each other. So we pray for those who do all those difficult jobs in our lives, Lord. For those who break their backs on our behalf, for those who work for a minimum wage, for those who have little access to health care, for those who do not have the money to send their kids to college. Help us to bind together, our Lord. Help us to come together as a community and as a nation, because we know, especially at this time when we honor labor, we know that we depend on one another. Help all here to labor to establish your kingdom on this earth. And may your grace, our God, be extended to those in need this day, the sick, those who may be battling with mental issues, those who suffer with loss and with pain, those who are hurting in any way. May they feel your touch this day. And enable us, God, enable us to be your instruments, to be your hands, to reach out to all those who are in need in love. And we ask this day that you continue to be with us as we now repeat the prayer that Jesus taught us, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Let us now rise either in body or in spirit one last time and sing together our closing hymn, which is number 426, Blessed be the tie that binds. Shall we rise now together and sing? And I certainly hope to meet with you again. It just won't be next Sunday, because I will not be here. But I hope that you have a great week this week and a great worship experience here next Sunday as well. And then continue to worship with us the rest of the Sundays of September as we examine what other words James has for us as Christians. Whatever you're doing this week, wherever you may be going, I know that you're not going to school tomorrow. I know that many of you are not having to labor because it's a day off from work. But whatever you're doing, if you're enjoying the holiday, or when if you do have to go back to work, you probably got a lot of catch up to do since you've been out some this week. Whatever you're doing this week, wherever you are, please note God's great creation. And note the season is beginning to change. Slowly the leaves will begin to change, and we will enjoy the glories of fall. Before you know it, they will be here. So be aware of God's great creation, because whether you're aware of it or not, God is going to be right there with you. Because God is always above us. God is always below us. God is always behind us. God always goes before us. God is always standing right beside us. And most importantly of all, at those most important times of our lives, please remember that God is inside us as well. Go in peace this day, my friends. Amen.